probably the animating notion of my politics. And that is that all humanity is equal and is worthy of that. And I actually think all of the sort of political and policy positions are, that I probably find myself in sympathy with, are attempting to affect that, in the real world. And so, and again, I'm putting aside your piece, but I'm just thinking about the moment we're in. When I hear or see people who are honored and commemorated in such a way so that they almost become a national religious figure. And then I see their content. And I see that their content is actively destructive to humanity. I have to draw a line there. Like, I think, like, for me, like, the bigger question is, where are the lines? You know what I mean? And I think there's no problem with saying, listen, you can't hurl epithets at people. You're out if you do that. I'm sorry. Look, you want to have a debate about whether we should have affirmative action, in colleges? I'm here for it. You want to have a debate?
What does it mean to be on the other side of the line?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
What does it mean? So once somebody's on the other side of the line,
right? What
does that mean for you?
For instance, once you think it's okay.
No.
I'm trying to make this concrete.
Yeah, no, I am too.
Yes.
Once, for whatever the definition of the line is.
Right.
What does it mean for you for somebody to be on the other side of it? Right? Not somebody who just died.
Right.
But somebody still living.
Right. If you think it is okay to dehumanize people, then conversation between you and I is probably not possible.
And so what do you do with the fact that so many people think that is okay?
I think what you try to do is, again, this is the difference, right? Like, I don't necessarily have the crystal ball to say that in this time, I'm going to be able to convince a majority of people that, for instance, let's just take the thing that's hot right now. Trans folks are human beings and deserve humanity. Although I think most people know that you shouldn't say what he said. Like, that shit is rude. It's just rude to talk to people like that. And I think most people know that. So as I'm thinking my way through the question, I actually think that's not a hard line to draw. I think not calling people out of their name, I think that's actually a basic value that most people have. And I think people who think it's not, who are pushing that, are actually themselves on the other side of the line.
But so I want to hold on this for a minute, because I do think this is like a very
and that's
core
different
question.
From policy, Ezra.
Yeah, I understand it's different than policy.
That's different than policy.
I think that one just reality is the president of the United States is a person who, in his comportment as a human being on the public stage, I would have said in 08, in 12, in 16, should be on the other side of the line.
Yeah.
I think he's a person who does not act with any sense of public or even personal decency.
Right.
And then he won in 16, lost sort of narrowly in 20 and then won in 2024. And I think the thing that has led to for me is recognizing that I don't get to draw the line. Now, it doesn't mean I don't have one in my own heart, but I think that is the thing that I am struggling with, which is not only is he clearly, for most people, or a lot of people, plurality of the voters in the last election, not somehow way over the line, but like, that means it's a lot of people who are willing to accept things that I thought we would have found unacceptable. Like, if you had told me, like, I would have thought that the way he acts in public is unacceptable, and it's not. And so I think for me, and this goes back to maybe the culture that you feel didn't exist, but I feel did, that there was a view that we could sort of work with politics with drawing these lines, that there were people going to be inside them and outside them, and we could work that way. And I think that I am like working with the question of what happens if you don't believe that, if you don't control the line. What I see is any line that existed at all collapsing. So I'm watching like Holocaust revisionism on like the biggest right-wing podcasts. Right. I'm watching Tucker Carlson like turn into, what I would describe as a white nationalist and become an absolute dominant force on the right, like bigger than he ever was in his, smarmy libertarian phase. And this stuff has real appeal, like as you said, right? That's not a surprise on some level. It's just something you have to deal with. And so that's where this question of the line drawing, like I have lines what I think should and should not be acceptable, but those lines clearly have no relationship to my country, the politics. And I think I've been asking the question without really having an answer. I want to be honest about this. Of well, what follows from that?
I think you do have a line. I think
I'm sure I do.
I think there are things, for instance, that I could say that would make you say it's no point in Ta-Nehisi coming up on and being on this podcast. And likewise, there are things you could say, obviously, that I would say it's no point in me talking to Ezra.
Yeah.
Like
I'm saying what happens if 35% of the country, 40% of the country, the dominant political force in the country is inside that? Does that change anything? Or no, like the line just holds?
No, I mean, welcome to Black America. That's our history. The line we have drawn in general has not been majoritarian politics, unfortunately. That's just been what it is, you know? And at the times that it's been majoritarian politics, people have done things and, you know, fiddled with government or done, you know, extremely violent things to make it not so, you know?
How do you deal in that answer? Like, how do you deal with Trump really substantially increasing his share of the Black vote?
Actually, I think where he is about where actually Republicans tended to be before Barack Obama. So I'm a little less. I mean, there's a conservative portion of our community that's always voted Republican. And I think, you know, obviously, I think sexism is a very, very real force. You know, I don't think it's completely explanatory, but the idea that there is, say, 20% of Black men who are fundamentally conservative, that doesn't really surprise me too much.
But I guess let's take, because I think this is a hard case. I think from your perspective and from my perspective, where we probably don't believe hugely different things, a huge amount of the country, right? A majority of the country believes things about trans people, about what policy should be towards trans people, about what language is acceptable to trans people, that like we would see as fundamentally and morally wrong.
Right.
And what politically, not in a column or something, but politically, should our relationship with those people be? Do we win them over? Do we compromise with them? Like, this feels like a very salient question. The Republican Party is going to make sure this is a relentlessly salient question.
Right.
So
I agree with that.
Where does the approach leave us? Right? Where do we go on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Look, I think a couple things. I think, again, look, my tradition is the only thing I have a reference point for, so I'm sorry to keep going back to this. But when I look at the times that we have lost, if I think specifically about the Black tradition, for instance, it's hard for me to say politically they did something wrong. You know what I mean? Like, Reconstruction falls. What was the thing that should have been done? On the contrary, I see, you know, a kind of courage that I wish we had today in a lot of people. You know what I mean? I see people willing to die and take bullets all the time. You know what I mean? What more could Ida B. Wells have done, you know, to get the anti-lynching bill passed? I mean, here is somebody that, you know, was banished from Tennessee on threat of being killed after she saw her friends, you know, murdered and lynched. And one of the things I will say is when I look back at that long tradition and I look back in the times that people have won and the places they've won, it's often not been their heroism that was the decisive factor ultimately. It's often not been their strategy that was the decisive factor. Folks look back at the Civil Rights Movement, for instance, and they talk about how brilliant it was to do the sit-ins and, you know what I mean, use mass media in the way that Martin Luther King used mass media, the appearance. All of that's true. But if we don't have World War II, You know what I mean? And the planet does not get a view of how horrific it can be when you decide you're going to eliminate people based on their traits. Civil rights movement happened? I don't know. I think windows open and close. And so I think some of this is up to the decisions that politicians make. I think some of it is also up to what is happening in the broader mass culture at the time. I think all this kind of, works together. I'm not against, this kind of strategizing. That I think that has to happen. But I think you also have to recognize like how broad the world is when you say politics.
In today's super competitive business tool at OOP that come for business in the
I think there's been a period of, you have actually, I think.
Speed Test Intelligence Data 1H 2025.
I think that you have actually, I think, been a very prime mover in this. I think there's been a period, particularly on the left, in which the Civil War, pre it, post it, the writings of that time, the people of that time, have become a sort of a rooting period, a place where we sort of go back and look and think about who are we, what was revealed about us. I'm taking nothing away from that.
Right.
But that's obviously a period where politics ultimately fails. I actually think, and I've thought about this a lot in reaction I have read in the last couple of weeks, I've thought a lot about how many people believe we are already in a cold civil war. That we are in a time that we are dealing with divisions and questions. I see it on the right, for sure. I hear it on the left. I have a lot of email that's like, we need a national divorce. How that's going to be effectuated, never exactly clear.
Do people
they do use that.
Do people you respect say that to you?
Well, yes, actually, I will say that. But I'm not going to, people say things to me that are off the record and I shouldn't say it. But you don't believe that though, right? You don't believe we are at a point. I think this is really important. I was curious what you would say to this question. You don't believe we are at a point where the next 10, 20, 30 years can't be shaped by decisions we would understand is within normal politics, within elections and legislation and organizing and so on.
No.
Good. I think that's great.
I mean, look, that could happen.
Yeah.
That could happen. But I guess the broader thing I am thinking about is how much does this era stand out in the long sweep of American history?
Yeah.
It's bad.
Well, so this is actually...
But it wouldn't make my list for the worst.
No, I agree with you. I'm where you are on this,
right,
to just be super clear.
Okay.
But I actually think one reason then the amount we focus on the Civil War period is tricky is because that's a period when it didn't work like that, right? You actually had to go over the cliff of that and have the war. I've been thinking a lot about, because I've been reading a lot about McCarthyism. So I've been thinking about that whole period. And you just sort of brought up the World War II as, sort of a generator of the politics that allows us to have the Great Society, the Civil Rights Act, et cetera. I think another way of sort of glossing that is you have the rise of Red Scare politics, which predate McCarthy. You have Joseph McCarthy, who is just for a period an unbelievably dominant force.
It's insane.
Everybody who challenges him loses.
That's right.
He becomes a complete kingmaker. He's eventually boxed out and beaten by Dwight Eisenhower, a sort of center-right, very, very anti-communist politician, but who can sort of take the center from McCarthy. But then it's like, what happens next? Nixon, who is the genteel red baiter to McCarthy's non-genteel red baiter, runs in the next election. He's beaten by JFK, who's a very center-left, very anti-communist, sort of runs to Nixon's right on communism. And he does it with Lyndon Johnson, on the bottom of the ticket, sort of representing Southern politics in the Democratic Party. It's a very, very, in a way, checkered series of moves that are accepting huge amounts of McCarthyism at that time. And yet it does sort of lead to political power that is then wielded in a very, very different way within fairly short order. I take from this, I've been thinking about this because I think we're sort of in a new McCarthyism, some lessons on how politics can work and like the give and the take of it. We've been sort of brought up the Civil War a bunch, but what do you take from this period?
I take something that we've kind of been circling for this entire conversation, which is that the role of politicians and the role of writers, intellectuals, et cetera, is very, very different. Politicians do things that I wouldn't do. I don't, for instance, I don't hold JFK or RFK up, you know what I mean, as the people
me
I
neither.
would, right? yeah.
I'm not a fan of JFK Camelot revisionism.
But I guess
it's not a very good president.
That's like a separate thing from whether, you know what I mean, why politics happens the way they do. Let me give you an instance that often also comes up. That's not the Civil War, and that's the New Deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there is a pretty strong argument that the New Deal not a strong argument, but it's pretty clear that the New Deal did quite a bit to create the social safety net, expand, create an American middle class, right? That's true. Did FDR want to, in his heart, exclude Black folks in the way that they were excluded from it? No. That was the price of getting the thing done. I understand that as politics. But were I there in that time, it would be incumbent on me to yell at FDR to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's really, 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 really important. We don't all have the same role. You know, when I wrote Case for Reparations, it was not my expectation, nor did I even think it would be politically intelligent for like Barack Obama to go up and yell, "I'm for reparations." You know what I mean? But that's different than, you know what I mean, my role.
I guess the substructure of a bunch of what I am saying, which may or may not be in argument with you. It's just right. When I texted you to come on, I was like, I've been thinking about what the underlying arguments are here. Mm-hmm, so you're kind of getting this spilling out of my brain. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a work of politics that for a bunch of different reasons has become demeaned. And I think, and this does not speak well of the people, so to speak, in power doing it, but I think that they are not doing it well. I think the culture around them, I think politicians are not always leaders. I think they're often followers. And I think that the idea that kind of political coalition building across these gigantic differences, building across public opinion, both not just as you wish it existed, but as it exists, has become, seen and treated as often betrayal, cowardice, moral fallibility. It's not, I think it's fine to say people got different roles. And in fact, it's good for intellectuals to criticize the politicians. But my view is that the political practice became too weak. I don't think that was true for Obama. I went back preparing to talk to you and I read your piece, My President Was Black.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
And it's very much in this tension, right? Where you say quite a bit, it would have been a bad idea for Barack Obama to say the things I am saying here.
Yeah.
To do the things in some ways I wish he had done. It would have been, that politics wouldn't have worked. There would have been no Obama presidency and his presidency would not have been successful. And I think I've been thinking about that line, right? In my own work and just in the political culture as I see it, that line between the sort of intellectual, analytical work and the actual work of politics, the how do we live here with each other work, right? Which I think is actually honorable work. And I think feels right now to me morally urgent and necessary. And not just over disagreement, just the whole thing being done in a strategic and disciplined sense. I think one of the things I've thought about is the need to actually raise the status of just old-fashioned politics. And I think I've been surprised to find myself feeling that way. But I think one way the second Trump term has changed me is I don't, and maybe you always believe this, right? I'm not putting this on you. I think what got built, for all of its flaws in the back half of the 20th century, was much more fragile than I'd understood. Not just the legislation or any of that, but the actual sense of what you could and could not do, what we would and would not accept. And I've just the sense that we can just tumble all the way back has become much more real to me. And so the work that people did to begin to build those guardrails and how hard that actually was, and the disappointment we eventually felt, I feel like we began to take something actually quite beautiful for granted, or only see what wasn't there as opposed to what was. And it's forced a little bit of, for me, how did they do it? How did they get out of the last one of these?
I'll just say, and I think I'm speaking for a broader community here. We are not happy, but we are not surprised, man. And again, the reason why we go back to Reconstruction and the Civil War is because it is, before the 1960s, the only glimpse at the possibility of a real democracy in this country. And it happened. And in some places, it was actually quite successful. You have people who, had been enslaved, who are written off as illiterate fools, who are, serving in legislatures. And actually, with the standard of the time, actually, it's such a hopeful, incredible story. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it was violently destroyed. Once you see that, and once you have that in your heritage, once you understand that, once you understand that Martin Luther King could be standing up, telling his own people, we do not embrace violence at all. It is morally repugnant. We embrace love. And that could get you shot. Not burn it down. Love can get you shot. You just have a different view of your country. It is not, I emphasize this over and over again, it is not a fatalistic view. It is not, it is written in stone that we will ultimately lose, but you understand that losing is a possibility.
But so then what does there's a Buddhist meditation I like. This is a weird place to go. But it goes like this. I am of the nature to grow sick. I'm of the nature to grow old.
Lose, but you understand that losing is a possibility.
But so then what does there's a Buddhist meditation I like. This is a weird place to go. But it goes like this. I am of the nature to grow sick. I'm of the nature to grow old. I'm of the nature to lose the people I love. I'm of the nature to die. How then shall I live? And
Love that.
yeah, I do it because sometimes you need the reminder.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying in a way is we are of the nature too.
Yeah.
And I think the place I'm trying to push is then, how then shall we live? Because in this distinction you're making between, like, you would have been there correctly yelling at FDR. And I'm not like asking you, but like me, right? Like my work, my role.
Can you answer that? Can you say what I think it's a good point. Would you define for me how you see, like, what your role is?
I don't know what my role is anymore. I'll be totally honest with you, man. I feel very conflicted about that question. The role I want to have is a person curiously exploring his political and intellectual interests in political peacetime. And the role I somehow have is sometimes that. But I am in the business, I'm a political opinion writer and podcaster and so on. And I'm in the business of political persuasion. And I feel like me and the people who believe what I believe, not narrowly speaking, but, like the whole broad coalition, have failed in a really consequential way. And I think it is.
You feel like you failed in your work?
I think there are places I failed. I mean, I think there are things I got right too. Like, I think we shouldn't have run Joe Biden again. I think I was right about that. I think I've gotten a lot right. But I think I've gotten definitely things wrong. But I think we are here now, right? That's what I would really say. And it is forcing me to rethink things I would prefer not to rethink. I will give you an example because people are mad at me on this one right now.
Please.
I said in a podcast with my colleague, Russ Dow, that he was pushing me on left radicalism. I was saying, I don't care about left-wing radicalism. I don't think it's some great threat. I don't think it's a huge political problem. I worry about left-wing pessimism, fatalism, that we are losing and don't want to change anything. And I said that the question for me is, how do we win Senate seats in places like Kansas and Missouri and Ohio? I said, I would like to see us doing things like in red states, and here I meant redder than those, running pro-life candidates. People got real upset about that, and I get why. But in 2010, when the Affordable Care Act passed, there were 40 House Democrats who were pro-life at some level. You had to do this whole negotiation with this guy, Bart Stupak.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And on the bright side, you don't have to have those negotiations now. And on the downside, you can't pass the Affordable Care Act. And the point is not that issue, right? That one issue, although things like, the example, say, Susan Collins, where she's in theory pro-choice, but she votes for Mitch McConnell and John Thune as leader. Right. Like, that's how you build power on some level, right? If you have those, Joe Manchin, like, I wish he were still a senator from West Virginia, as much as I have deep disagreements with him. I think that I am a person, I think you are a person, whether you admit it or not, who is one of the people with a, voice in shaping what our political culture is. And I believe at some level that political strategy is downstream from political culture. I think it means exploring things that are uncomfortable and being pretty disciplined in a way maybe I haven't been, about separating the question of what I believe from what I believe will win power. Because I currently think that the cost of losing power is horrifying and dangerous, and we can't keep doing it. So that's where my head is.
Can we stay with that exactly? Because the immediate thing, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the immediate thing that springs to mind for me in that question is not who you're abandoning, but how do you square the fact that, in fact, reproductive rights has proven to be pretty popular in red states? And I'm thinking about referendums that have been passed such that they've had to, change the rules. Like, how do you separate that?
When I sort of said this in glancingly.
Like, there are people who didn't vote for Kamala, but give me my reproductive rights.
I think that I was using first pro-life as an illustrative example.
Okay.
But there are many red districts in this country. And there are states that we do not even think about competing in anymore, right? I'm not talking about Ohio here. I think you have to try things. By the way, not only moderation kind of things. You could try going much harder on economic populism, which some people are trying. I think you might need to combine those two strategies, right? Which is sort of the Dan Osborne in Nebraska approach. I think that I think even before the question of what your policies are, and I believe this very deeply, there's a question of whether or not people feel like you respect them and like them, even if they disagree with you. Before I think people will give you power, they don't even ask, do they like you? They ask whether you like them. And I think a lot of the country feels we don't like them. Not only do I believe that, I know that. I've seen the focus groups. I've seen the survey data. I've talked to the people who work on this. And that's going to require, changing that is going to require making moves that somehow send a loud enough signal that people begin to think we've changed it at some level. Sherrod Brown should be able to win in Ohio.
Yes.
The reason he cannot win in Ohio is the Democratic Party itself is a millstone around his neck that drags him down. So what do you do about I'm not here to tell you I got the answer.
Yeah.
What I would feel much better about is I felt there was like a strategic discipline about finding it.
So I just if you will take this very gentle pushback.
Yeah, please.
I think
you're here for it.
I haven't seen exactly what people are saying, online in terms of this, but I do think like what immediately strikes me is if you take, I know you would just, it's not, the example necessarily that you would hold out, about reproductive rights, but I think the problem with musing about that is abandoning it is a very real possibility for people who don't have the option necessarily to fly to another state or do X, Y, and Z. So I suspect when they hear somebody of your status, even if it's not the example you mean, putting it out in the air, like they feel, and it's not just that you're putting it out in the air, it's putting it out in the air, and actually, I don't necessarily even mean that one. No, but like if you're gonna say that, I think you really gotta.
I'll stand behind
it.
You
gotta put the data behind it. I think that's really, really important.
I will say, and I think this is actually the nub of it, right? Okay. Like I'm glad we're sort of here. I am saying the thing it sounds like I am saying. To be very, very clear.
Right.
I think in a place like Nebraska, you should try to run some pro-life Democrats. I wish people, instead of saying that an expressive or strategic question in politics was betraying or abandoning the people we wish to protect, I wish what we said was we lost power in a way that allowed Donald Trump to drive the Supreme Court to a 6-3 Republican majority. And that majority overturned Roe v. Wade. Right. It overturned Roe v. Wade and actually abandoned all these people. Right. Actually fucked them over. Right?
Right.
It is part of, I think, when I say that like the work of politics has become diminished, it is part of how that happened, that talking about this creates this sort of counter argument. Well, even to discuss it is to abandon. In 2008, as you and I both know, Barack Obama ran as a public opponent of gay marriage.
Right.
He ran opposed to it.
Right.
At a time when not only, I won't speak for you, was I not opposed to it, but most of us did not, most of us did not think he was opposed to it.
Right.
Like at his heart, we did not think he was opposed to it.
Right.
But he was playing politics.
Right.
That playing of politics allowed him to name Supreme Court justices, and that led to the decision that created a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. And I am saying that that kind of playing politics is needed.
I can give you an example from the other side, by the way, too.
Yeah, go for it.
Brother, you know what my position was during the election about Palestine, about Gaza. Kamala Harris was running to be the first Black woman to be president of the United States. You cannot imagine how animated Black folks were. And some would argue the base of the Democratic Party, Black women. You know, we're going to, see this thing. She was not taking a position that I thought was particularly moral. I had to talk in front of Black audiences about that. You know what I mean? And I had to do the other thing, which was go before Arab American audiences here, Palestinian American audiences here, and say, look, I'm with you. You can be mad at me. You probably will be mad at me. I get it. But for me, politics is the lesser of two evils. We've been fighting this battle for a long time. We have never had the luxury of electing people that represented the best of us. And this is why I'm voting for her. This is a really, really serious thing. And when you hear these Palestinian Americans, and when you hear these Muslim Americans, and when you hear these Arab Americans upset about this, you can't just yell at them. You have to take them seriously. These were hard, very, very difficult conversations. But when I made those conversations, look, man, I had to be buttoned up about it. I just think you take very, very seriously the need to convince people outside of the tent right now, right? About like we have to convince them to come in. I guess what I want from you is I want you to take as seriously people who are in the tent and who are vulnerable and afraid. And if you have to convince them of something that's extremely, extremely uncomfortable, or tell them that you're taking a position that is extremely uncomfortable, I just think you owe them a little more. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
man.
That's fine. I'll take it. But I want to put this on you for a minute, right?
Sure.
You keep sort of putting it back on me.
Yeah, I'm open. Go ahead. I won't.
You keep putting it back on me here on the Ta-Nehisi Coach Show.
Yes, right.
What then should we do? What then should be? You are one of the most influential public intellectuals in the country. I know you don't like to think of politics as a thing you do, but it is a thing you do. What, as bad as you know this can get, and given that you're not a hopeless person, or who, doesn't think you should just collapse into fatalism, what do you think should happen now?
I think that really depends on what your role is. I don't have a great overarching theory for what everybody needs to do, because I think we all have different positions. I know what my role is. And I do see myself as part of politics, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very, very important way of answering the question. I mean, I'm not going to be the person that yells at you because, you went on a bunch of right-wing podcasts. As I've said many times, in the course of this interview, I see myself as a writer. I see myself as a journalist. I see myself as someone for whom it's very, very important to state the truth plainly and to clarify things as best I can. I'm not a strategist for the party, and I've tried to, as you raised in that Barack Obama piece, I've tried to respect the difference.
I guess I'm not pushing you to be a political strategist, right? I think that for me, something you see me doing right here, something I think people reacting to me doing is saying, well, if the fight is this profound and we're losing the fight, then the question is to think about how we fight.
Right.
That's something about knowing that this much of the country is, on the wrong side of what my line would have been.
Right.
Knowing that what Kirk was doing, what people like him were doing, was working.
Right.
That imposes a set of questions upon us that need to be answered.
Right. The thing I'm struggling with in this conversation and even in that question is the fact that there are things that you yourself have actually advocated for that had they been done, we would be having a very different conversation.
I think I wanted to not be close.
You said what?
I wanted to not be close.
You will call this my fatalism, but I am not surprised. I think it's going to be close. I think it'll be close for a very, very long time. I would like for it to be less close too. But
do you think that's within our power or not really?
Listen, I have a friend, and I'm not going to out him. He's a mutual friend of ours who always says, this is the best set of white folks we have ever had in the entire history of Black America. This is the most woke. This is the least racist. This is the most aware group that we have had. You know what I mean? Like, for us, and for those of us who ground ourselves in a larger tradition, this is not close. Like, this is a remarkable time. In terms of our freedom, as writers and journalists to speak to people, in terms of the amount of people who are empowered and have some amount of privilege and could just look away and are not looking away. It's not a great time politically. You understand what I'm saying? But it's just, it's not the worst either.
No, it's not.
It's not the worst, All
right, then. I think always our final question. What are 3 books you'd recommend to the audience?
So the first book is a book called The Brothers by Stephen Kinzer. which is a joint biography of Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, and how incredibly one was head of the State Department, the other was head of the CIA, and how they worked to overthrow multiple countries during Eisenhower's time. It's just an incredible, mind-boggling book, and it's helping me answer some questions about the role of America in the broader world. The second one is an oldie but goodie, which I reached for before I wrote my piece, is Race and Reunion by David Blight, which I think is just essential because it shows how a country forgets, and forgets in service of a politic that I would say is problematic. The third one is our mutual friend Chris Hayes' book, Siren's Call, which I think, in fact, actually tells us a lot about the conversation that we're having today, and the influence of social media screens and distraction.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, man, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ezra. I appreciate it too.
I think conservatives have a really great way of designing a narrative that makes sense to as broad of an audience as possible.
Everyone is in the business of crafting media narratives,
yes.
right? And
I wish Democrats were a little bit better at it, to be fair.